All right, welcome to Kubernetes SIG Cloud Provider for November 20th, 2024. I've put the link to the agenda in the chat, and we do use the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, so please be kind. Just jumping into today's agenda, I think the first thing that we have is Almiko is going to tell us about the SIG maintainer track from KubeCon.
Yeah, thanks, Bridget. So yeah, I wanted to put a link here. We had a good talk. I think there was probably maybe like 10 to 20 people there who showed up. Had
Friday
some
afternoon.
Yeah, Friday afternoon. We had some questions afterward and some nice comments about how everything went. But yeah, I put a link in the agenda there if people want to watch it. I think it's cool. Another thing was I attended the SIG meet and greet again this year, and it's SIG meet and greet is about a 2-hour event that takes place where we set up tables and put little things up that say SIG Cloud Provider, SIG Auto Scaling, and people walk around and talk. And I've done a number of these now, and I think this one was probably our most active yet. I had several people come up to me asking about the SIG and how to get involved. A notable mention. Someone from Intel came up and asked about, writing a CCM for their cloud that they're doing. And so, yeah, it was like, I think there was one other person who came up and asked me about building a CCM as well. So it was, yeah, it was nice to have kind of these interactions. And, given the discussions we've had recently about providing more guidance for people who want to write CCMs, and doing more testing around CCMs, I think it's really cool to hear people like wanting to build these things. And I'm optimistic that we can build even more guidance for people to make this like even more of a self-service kind of like easy to approach thing. So yeah, I was pretty optimistic coming out of KubeCon. It was a nice time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll add to that that you had an excellent let's see. I'm just looking at like the link goes to the cloud provider uh video. I wonder if we haven't already, I know we're not going to link the Google Slides necessarily, but I wonder if the PDF might be, if we haven't uploaded it yet, we should, because the other thing is he had a lot of QR codes for people who want to build CCFs in the talk. So if we haven't already uploaded that, that is an action item for either of us.
Yeah, I did not upload them to the Sketch site yet, but I had been
Okay.
talking with some people who had problems uploading. So I don't know,
Oh,
like
yeah. I
it might
remember
have been
hearing
related.
about that.
Yeah, it might have been just the contributor summit, but I'll go check it out again and see if I can upload them there. And at the very least, I can link them. I can link them here too. So
Yeah. Well, we can, I mean, I'm okay with linking this particular group to the Google Slides. I just wouldn't want to necessarily have that be the official source of truth for,
right. Yeah, absolutely. It should be on the Sketch for sure.
okay. All right. So anything else about KubeCon, and for anyone else who either was there or wish they were there, any KubeCon thoughts?
So not this just done KubeCon, but worth mentioning, Sunday is the cutoff for any
Hmm.
talk proposals for KubeCon London.
Not maintainer track, but yes, for regular talk proposals. Do you think that when you say meeting for London, Walter, about the build a CCM, do you mean the Contrib Fest thing that they put on the schedule sometimes, or do you mean something else?
I wasn't sorry, I meant just KubeCon in general. Sorry, or some sort of talk. Sorry, we should do a build a CCM talk for London.
Oh, okay. Meeting to me sounded like Contrib Fest or something else, participatory. But
Yeah, I was just
yeah.
thinking, I don't know if we have a recorded something on KubeCon that is, hey, here's how you could build a CCM and maybe even take it one level further, and here's how you could build a Kubernetes distribution.
Mm. I like this a lot. Are you planning on being in London?
If I can convince someone to, pay my airfare and
I
I
think
also have
proposing
one.
that would be,
Yep.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I said proposing that sounds great. If you want to drop it in the Slack channel over the next few days, I am happy to review. But yes, to Almiko's point, we do all have until early in the day US time Sunday, not late in the day because time zones. So early midday US time. Is it what? Afternoon, mid-afternoon for your West Coasters
I
is our
think that
deadline.
sounds like a good maintainer track talk as well. Even if we
Sure.
don't end up putting it in for the CFP this Sunday, like that sounds like an amazing maintainer track to me.
Oh yeah, we would definitely put that in as the maintainer track, but why not? Why not both?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. All right. Looking forward to that then. All right. So that wraps the KubeCon is over. Ready, time to get ready for KubeCon topic. Um, it does seem sooner and sooner and sooner every time, which is amazing.
It is pretty funny. Yeah. Like we just left and it's like CFP closes next Sunday.
It's like I don't even think I've done all my laundry from the last conference. Oh, 3 is an understatement, sir. There's going to be 5 next year. It's going to be Hong Kong, and there's going to be Japan, and there's going to be India and EU and North America. Yeah,
Exciting times to be a Kubernaut, right?
it is exciting. Okay, so next up, Elmiko, do you wanna pop that issue open and kind of talk us through this has cluster ID and related cluster ID functionality?
Yeah. Let me share my screen here if this works. Seem to have did not get the share screen menu to go. There it is. Oh, I see. It's weird. Like Zoom does not know how to put like a pop-up on the front. So like it's okay. So this is a topic that we had discussed before KubeCon, and I wanted to come back to it because we made a little progress there. And I guess since we have someone new here today, Kapil, this might also be something interesting because I think this is an entry point into what our SIG does that doesn't necessarily require a lot of experience and whatnot. And it might be a good task for someone new to look into. So we had this question that had come up before, and I changed the title of this. So about a little more than a month ago, we had a user post a question in the Cloud Provider repo, where we don't really take issues from, and they had been wondering about this has cluster ID interface and kind of what that meant. And we have this piece of example code in the main that says, oh well, if has cluster ID isn't there, then you should like throw up an error and tell the user to use this allow untagged cloud option. And I think this code is very old. It's been part of the cloud provider framework for a long time. So we had a user who'd done some research and said, where is the cluster ID actually used? And is this a part of the contract with Kubernetes? And if we don't do this, are we going to break something? There was just a lot of confusion around how this is used. So we had a big discussion about it with several people adding in their comments here. The original poster, I think his name is William, yeah, Thomas, sorry, had come back and asked some more questions. Were we going to undeprecate some of these things that were deprecated, this allow untag cloud, or did they want to deprecate it? So what it turns out, though, is that people are using this. Some cloud providers do use it, and they use the cluster ID as an identifier for themselves. This is a way that they deprecate the deprecation. That's my favorite line in this one. But some clouds do use the cluster ID, and it is labeled on nodes so that they can understand what relation that node has to some sort of internal infrastructure. So we absolutely cannot and should not deprecate this. But as we discussed more and more people kind of explained, how this was used and everything, I think what we arrived at was that we should probably be documenting this better in the code. And so what I propose and what I'd like to see done is in our cloud provider framework, there's 2 areas I think we should improve the documentation on. One is where the has cluster ID interface is defined, I think we should have probably more text here describing what cluster ID is and how a cloud provider could use that for their own, you know, for their own purposes, like just make it clear that cluster ID is something they can use. And then likewise, I think we should add some comments here about this, if not cloud has cluster ID, because there are clouds that, do not need a cluster ID, and we wouldn't want to tell them to replicate this logic if they just don't need it in their CCM at all. So I think, going back to the original issue here, I think the next step is, for someone to go through and kind of like do a little bit more research, follow up on the comments that were here, and then come up with some code comments that we can put so that authors in the future will have an easier time doing these things. So that was pretty much what that was about. Does anybody have questions or comments, or and maybe Walter, you got some history around the cluster ID, or I don't know. I think Walter's searching for the unmute button. There we go.
And the relevant window. Yes, I was listening, but uh um yeah, I mean there are some I don't actually have that much history, but I will say that one of the interesting things with Kubernetes has always been that core Kubernetes doesn't have a cluster concept, which has always made things a little interesting, right? Um, a lot of this comes down to there's no API for provisioning nodes or provisioning clusters in Kubernetes, which I've been doing this for years, and that still seems odd to me. Uh, so I think a lot of it comes down to if you don't have a concept of, if you don't actually have an object that represents a cluster, and you don't even have a way of provisioning nodes, then the concept of a cluster ID has always been sort of deferred to one level up, whether that's COPS or cluster API or whatever your cloud provider happens to provide.
That makes sense. And I think like the main thing here that the original question was about from Thomas was, if we don't have a cluster ID, is that going to break some part of Kubernetes? And I think the investigation said, no, that's not going to break Kubernetes. It's only going to break things that you might have been written to look for the cluster ID. And in specific, I think Thomas had been copying some of the code from the cloud provider framework and saw that if clause and was like, okay, well, do I just have to return true here or something? So yeah. So I mean, it sounds like we're all kind of on the same page here, and that adding this advice would probably just be an easy thing to do and helpful to people.
I agree. I mean, the other thing I think is that individual CCM or cloud provider code may need it, but I think what should happen in those cases is if your cloud provider code needs a cluster ID, and I can understand reasons it might, it should also be able to, pull it and cache it in some variable that you maintain. But yeah.
Right. For better, for worse, like I think the pattern has been to use Kubernetes as like your database for this, and just like, stuff it in a label on your node objects. And then that seems to be the way people are using it, in practice.
I mean, that's fair. And I don't know if the KCM has actually stopped pulling in the cloud provider code. I mean, if it hasn't, we should probably help them get rid of the cloud provider code out of the Kube API server in the KCM.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. Yeah, I think almost all of it.
Yeah. Well, and at some point I would love to chat about that. But my point is, the CCM is the only thing left that should have cloud provider in it, other than, like some stuff that storage does as well. But
cool. Okay, well, this is a good discussion. I think probably what I'll do is go back and make another comment on that PR, just referencing this meeting and stuff like that. And then, yeah, like I can't say when I would get to it, but I did put help wanted on the issue so that hopefully we could get a little wider visibility, and perhaps, you know, new people who are coming to the SIG. I think this is the kind of thing that it could definitely be something that someone newer to the SIG could get into. So yeah, that was it for that one.
Awesome, thank you. And Kapil, you were mentioning that you are interested in and exploring a bunch of SIGs. I think all SIGs are different, and some of them have very structured onboarding for new members, and some of them, like us, are a little smaller and maybe just have, well, here's an issue we're looking at, and somebody could look into it. So if you are interested in that particular issue, by all means, feel free to jump in and put some comments on it. And do you have any
Sure, but
questions for us about that? Yeah.
yeah, I am a bit pretty new. It looks interesting, and I think I'm trying to get some context. Yeah, let me go to this issue, get some history, and I think I can take your help. I'm connected on Slack, so
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And no worries, we're not going to come back in 2 weeks and say, have you done it yet? Like, it's not
good,
like that. It's more
good.
like, hey, we have identified something that someone could look at.
Sure,
Yeah,
thank you.
if it looks interesting to you, Kapil, it would be great to have your help, you know. But we
Sure.
understand you're just getting into all this, and it's a lot of.
No, I have a lot of time. Like I'm kind of on break in between jobs, so yeah,
Okay,
I can take it.
cool.
Wonderful.
All right, I guess any
Okay.
other questions or comments about that? All right, I had the next
All right.
topic as well.
Oh yeah, follow up from last time. We were
So,
talking about the staging cloud provider code. Yeah.
right. So last time we had a big discussion with, you know, several folks from AWS, and you know, kind of about what is the expectation of the CCMs, and with respect to like breaking out functionality into other operators, and like what is our, you know, kind of what are our responsibilities to our users to let them know, you know, what they need to properly run, you know, cloud controller functionality in their clusters. So we've had a, you know, we had a good discussion, and I think one of the outputs of that is that, you know, myself and probably a couple other Red Hatters are going to look into, well, we would like to become maintainers in more of the SIG owned cloud controllers. So, you know, to help with some of the issues we talked about before with maintenance of new features, and, you know, things that, you know, that probably should belong in the CCMs, but the teams currently maintaining them don't have bandwidth to do. We'd like to help support that. So I'm trying to arrange time in my day to get more into this stuff so that we can help kind of support some of these features. But that was only one part of what we talked about last time. The other part of what we talked about was improving kind of our process around cloud controllers, especially cloud controllers that are owned by the CNCF. And that is that we would like to have better, or not better, we would like to have clearer documentation about what, you know, what controller loops are supported by that cloud controller manager. If there are, you know, issues that users should know about, like the frozen feature states, or, you know, the roadmap, I guess, going forward about where, you know, changes will be happening. And then also a possibility to link to other operators that might be supplemental that users would want to know about if they're trying to get this functionality. And so I think the next steps are probably going to be to start putting up a draft of an enhancement for what we would want this documentation to look like. And then if we can agree on that, I think we as the SIG should take it upon ourselves to start proposing these changes into the individual SIG-owned repositories, because, you know, everything in Kubernetes SIGs that is a cloud controller should theoretically be sponsored by this SIG. And I think we could do a good job to make them look very similar in terms of their READMEs, and in terms of guidance that people use to deploy them. Walter, you've got your hand up, please.
So just one spot of history. One of the things that this SIG came out of were the individual SIG AWS, SIG GCP, and SIG Azure. So we consumed all three of those SIGs to make SIG, and some others to make SIG Cloud Provider. And we are I would say not just technically, but actually practically, the owner for most of the like cloud provider GCP and cloud provider Azure. This SIG owns those repos. Like, you know, if you look in the actual charters and you look in all of the maintenance stuff, we own them. And that's not an accident. Like,
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you clarifying that. And I also appreciate, like, last time, I think, you brought this up with I would say, a strong voice as well. And I really appreciate that, Walter, because I don't want to, I don't want to be seen as like the bull in the china shop. But what you were saying, obviously made sense to me, but I didn't want to start, like, pushing things around like that. But I think that now that we've had that meeting, I think it's a great opportunity for this SIG to take a more active role in kind of, making the user experience for the CCMs better. So if we can improve the documentation there, if we can make it easier to deploy these things and understand what kind of interactions people will have. Antonio and I and Joel had been working on a blog post recently to kind of talk to some of the chicken and egg problems you can get into with CCMs. So yeah, like, I really appreciate the history lesson there, and yeah, I'd love to see us go forward and make this even better for people in the future. Did you raise your hand again?
I did.
Cool. What? Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to bring up, and this is, I don't know, tangential, but I think related to what you're talking about. Um, I mean, controller managers are controller managers because they run controllers. There are controllers that are common to both the KCM and the CCM, and there have been previous efforts to make them more similar. And the CCM, in fact, started as a branch off of the KCM 9 years ago, something like that. But we don't actually use the same controller manager code, and this is personally always struck me as a bit strange. Like, I feel like the only difference fundamentally between a CCM and a KCM should be whether or not it injects a cloud provider into the controller. But sadly, that's not true. And one of the reasons, or one of the effects of that, is that there are a lot more people maintaining the KCM than there are maintaining the CCM or even the CCM core. And I feel like we could benefit by having a common base to the CCM and KCM.
I mean,
So
that makes a lot of sense to me. And it, from your description, and I've looked at some of the code across these two, but certainly not enough. Yeah, it sounds like we should probably be studying the KCM stuff and seeing if there's a way that we could leverage a commonality and maybe, bring some of that into the CCM, at least into the framework. And then, we could probably, like you said before, since we own the other repos, we could start pushing these changes or proposing them to those other repos as updates as well, and maybe find some collaborators in those communities too. I think that's a fine idea, Walter. I would love to understand it better personally, because I haven't looked at the manager code in depth. But yeah, this is very curious to me. I think this is something we should probably, write up an issue about and maybe see if we could start thinking about it, in
well,
a wider sense with other people.
absolutely. The other thing I will say is some of these things you're proposing doing, like, hey, what feature sets are turned on in this controller manager, and how does it affect an individual controller? Those aren't CCM specific problems.
Yeah. All right, I'm done typing, Bridget.
Oh,
Um,
sorry, I just was trying to add like one more line, but go ahead.
yeah, no worries, no worries. Yeah, this sounds great to me. I guess, like, Walter, do you have any recommendations for, like, next steps that we might, like, if I had some time to look into this, what do you think would be like a next step that would help kind of move things forward?
If you might, maybe the best thing, because it's not quick, would be book some time. I mean, if you're up for it, you could book some time with me on Friday, and I can go through and show you some of the old work where we had started this and then never finished.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to do that.
Okay.
Maybe maybe I'll send you something for Friday, and maybe if anyone else, I could add other people if they'd like to join in, and we can just record it, and then that way we'll have something to kind of go on.
Awesome. I'm afraid I got to run to another meeting, but thanks everyone.
Cool. Thanks as always, Walter. Okay, so I guess I can take an action item to follow up with Walter on that.
Okay, awesome. And then I was just looking ahead to the coming schedule. December 4th in 2 weeks, I'm available. So presumably we can, depending on whether or not Almiko's available, I think that's a normal meeting time. December 18th is my last day in office. Oh, you are showing your calendar. I don't know if you want to do that.
I probably didn't, but hopefully it'll be okay.
But December 4th, normal meeting. December 18th, that's my last day in office before I'm gone for the rest of the year. So I certainly can meet, but I think I have other meetings that are also vying for attention. So that's a question mark one. January 1, we definitely are canceling. And then January 15th, back to normal. So I guess the only open question is December 18th. Almiko, do you have specific, and now I'm looking at my work calendar to make sure, because I want to see somebody scheduled something against that.
Right.
Okay.
If for those who were quick enough with their eyes, I am free on both the 4th and the 18th.
It looks like I'm free on the 18th for now. I just know how people are since it's my last day in office for the rest of the year. So normal meeting for the 18th should be fine, but I will let Almiko know if I'm going to be pulled in other directions. So we're looking for normal meeting, cancel, and back to normal
I think,
is what we're
yeah, I
looking
think
at.
that makes sense to me.
All right. Is there anything else, Kapil or John or Lucas, that you'd like to discuss?
What is the name of our CIG? Like I just attended meetings. I was not much aware of the context.
I'm sorry?
What is the name of our this SIG team?
This is
This is
SIG
SIG
Cloud
Cloud
Provider.
Provider.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I just saw your comment in chat though, Bridget. I wanted to ask you about that. You said documenting this better in the code and hopefully not just in the code. I was thinking
Yeah.
that, and I'm not sure where else we would document it, because maybe we need a document describing how to write a CCM, but I don't think we have just like a technical document about how to write one of these or talking about the interface. So I'm not sure where else we would put it as well.
And this thing that these cloud providers are using, the based on the context I just got right now. So this code, we own that code where this cluster is being used, or it is being used by the commercial, like by Azure or GCP by themselves. Do we know that?
Right. So when we say we own this code, in the history of Kubernetes, right? In the early days, there needed to be a layer between Kubernetes and the infrastructure it was running on, so that we could know things like node lifecycle, like if the instance disappears, or if you create a load balancer service in the cluster, then the infrastructure creates a load balancing, service for you, like an elastic load balancer or something. So this SIG, part of the reason this SIG was created, and what Walter was just saying, was originally that code was in the Kubernetes core, and this SIG was created to help with migrating that code out of the core into individual sub-projects. Those sub-projects each had their own SIG, like SIG AWS, SIG Azure, etc.
But that's not the case right now.
Right. When this SIG was formed, when SIG Cloud Provider was formed, we subsumed those other SIGs. They became part of this one. And so we now are the responsible body for the code that exists in the Kubernetes and Kubernetes SIGs organizations on GitHub. So there are other cloud providers that haven't been contributed to the CNCF. We have no ownership over those. But the ones that have been provided to the CNCF or donated, we're the SIG that has ownership over those. And so when a user deploys on AWS, for example, they would want, and if they use kubeadm will automatically deploy this component for them. But if they were doing it on their own, they would need to know how to deploy this cloud controller manager. And so part of what we're talking about today with documentation and whatnot is making a better experience for users who have to use these components in their clusters, so that they can understand like what features they get, what operators they might need to install if they want to get more features, those type of things. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but yeah, I had one more thing. Like, so specific to this first thing, not the second. The first thing around that area, this cluster ID thing. That what is that cluster ID and documentation? So I was saying that this cluster ID. So we are not using a lot in our Kubernetes code base, but the cloud providers are using. So do we have some reference to that other than this issue ID in the Kubernetes GitHub?
No, we don't. So
Okay.
that
And we don't need to,
issue,
right?
yeah, that issue that we opened is kind of the main discussion about this. And so what we've determined is that, yes, like Kubernetes core does not use this cluster ID, but individual cloud controllers might need the cluster ID for the work that they do on that platform, right? And so what we need to do is we need to generate some guidance so that users who are implementing this code understand completely, okay, this cluster ID is something that I can use internally. I can use it to help identify clusters. And if I need to, I can allow users to turn it on or turn it off. If you don't need it, you might not want to include it in your application at all. That's the kind of guidance that I would like to see.
Okay, thank you. I will look into it. I will need some more background, but yeah.
Yeah, for
That's
sure.
very helpful.
Yeah, no, happy to get any collaboration you want to share with us, Kapil.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
And welcome, Morgan. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Dude, I saw Bridget's
Hi,
message.
Morgan.
I have a question too.
Yeah.
So sorry, joining so late, had computer issues, but I had a follow-up question from KubeCon. For the testing that you guys were talking about in your talk, is the subscription that you're using for Azure a subscription that's unique to you guys, or is it the community like subscription that's already out there?
Yeah, I would expect it to be the community. It would be through the arrangement that Azure has made with CNCF to donate, whatever credits or time they've donated. I wouldn't expect it to be a separate account.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, cool. And then the other question I had was, as far as testing, are there certain like guidelines that you guys have already, or is it just we're looking for people to do testing?
So we do have some guidelines. We have some tests currently in the Kubernetes repo. Those tests are mostly, but not all, written for GCP. So I think what we need to do is we're probably going to have to study the GCP tests and understand if there's like a set of common or generic tests we can pull out of those to make as the core of the new tests. There is one test, the node lifecycle test, that does run on GCP, AWS, and I think Azure, but I don't remember. That one will need to be made generic for everything. And then the other more difficult part is in the network test, the test owned by SIG Network, there are some load balancer specific tests that run on, that have like skip, if not on platform, whatever. I think we'll need to distill tests from those as well, so that we can properly test the service controllers and make sure that load balancers are created and everything.
Right.
So I think, so we do have some tests currently that are like prior art. Part of the process of doing this is we're going to have to enumerate those, convert them into new test ideology, and then figure out where we have gaps. And once we have a good look at what we have, we can figure out what gaps we have or things we never implemented and say, okay, now we've got a good methodology to be able to implement these new tests.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, no, good questions. Thank you.
Thank you. That sounds like some exciting spreadsheets are in our future.
We can only hope, right?
All right, wonderful. So our next meeting is scheduled for 2 weeks from now, and then Elmiko, you and Walter were talking about a one-off. Can you give us more details about what day or time you think that'll be?
Yeah, I think I'll probably try to schedule something for Friday afternoon Eastern, so that it could be morning Pacific time. And I
This
think
week?
this week, yeah, this Friday, I'll reach out to Walter and see if he's got some time. And it, I'll post something about it in our SIG channel. If anyone else would like to be on the invite, just, ping me and I'm, with your email address, and I'm happy to add you on the invite.
Thank you. All right. Do we have anything else we should cover today?
We got to all my topics, so I'm happy.
And I see, Capil, you've put your email in there for Elmiko to add you
Yeah,
to that
so
meeting for Friday.
I can start joining and understanding at least a 1%, 2%, 3% progressively. So that will fine.
Great.
Cool, got it.
All right. Do we have anything else before we call it and say, see you all either Friday if you're doing the one-off or in 2 weeks? Okay. Thank you all so much. Take care.
Thanks, bye.